Tonight, you will look up. Maybe it happens on the drive home. Maybe it happens from a window, or a balcony, or a field somewhere far from the city. And for just a moment, you will tilt your head back and see them. Thousands of cold white points of light scattered across the dark. You will look at them for a few seconds. Then you will look back down. But your ancestors could not look back down. Not easily. Not quickly. The stars were not decoration to them. They were not background. For most of human history, the night sky was the most important thing a person could read. And what they believed those lights were, what they told themselves, their children, their dying, is stranger and more human than anything modern astronomy has since revealed. This is not a story about what the stars are. You probably already know that. It is a story about what you once believed they were, before you had the words to be wrong about them. Go back 200,000 years. You are standing on the same continent where modern humans first emerged. The night is total. There are no cities. There is no ambient light of any kind. The Milky Way is not a faint smear above you. It is a river of white so bright it casts shadows. Archaeologist Dwayne Hamaker, who has spent decades studying the astronomical traditions of indigenous Australians, describes a sky so vivid that the darkness between the stars, what astronomers now call the dark nebulae, was as visible and meaningful as the stars themselves. Your ancestors did not just see the lights. They saw the shapes made by the absence of light, and they named those too. The dark patches between the bright points were animals. They were a possum clinging to a branch. They were an emu walking across the sky. This is called dark constellation astronomy, and it predates the dot-to-dot star patterns of Greece and Rome by tens of thousands of years. It tells you something important. The human brain was looking for creatures before it was looking for anything else. Pattern recognition was your survival tool. And so when you looked at the most complex visual field you had ever seen, millions of scattered points of light, you did not see math. You did not see gas clouds. You saw living things. Now, move forward in time. 30,000 years ago, in a cave in southern France, someone pressed their hand against the wall and blew red ochre around their fingers. Near those handprints, they painted animals. And above those animals, there is increasing evidence, laid out by researcher Michael Rappengluck, that certain cave paintings may encode astronomical information. Specific groupings of dots above painted animals match the Pleiades star cluster, the Hyades, Orion's belt. Whether or not the interpretation is fully settled, the impulse it suggests is unmistakably human. They were putting the sky on the walls. They were recording what they saw above them with the same urgency they used to record the animals they hunted. Because the sky moved. That was the terrifying, magnificent thing. It was not static. It turned. The moon grew and shrank. Certain stars appeared only at certain seasons. The brightest wanderers, what you now call planets, drifted against the fixed background in ways that seemed purposeful, willful, impossible to explain without intent behind them. So your ancestors gave them intent. In ancient Mesopotamia, the earliest documented civilization to write about the stars in systematic detail, the sky was a second Earth inhabited by gods. The planet you call Venus was Inanna, the goddess of love and war, who descended into the underworld when it disappeared below the horizon and rose again when it reappeared. The Babylonian astronomers who tracked her movements across generations of clay tablets were not doing science in the modern sense. They were doing theology. They were watching a god. Every pattern they found in the sky was a message from above to below, and their job was to read it without making a mistake, because a king's fate, an army's fate, depended on the reading. Historian Francesca Rochberg, whose work reconstructs the intellectual world of Babylonian astronomy, makes a point that tends to unsettle modern readers. Those ancient observers were not primitive. They were not confused. They were operating inside a complete and internally consistent model of reality in which the sky and the earth were part of one living system, and the stars were among the most reliable things in that system. They tracked Venus across 21-year cycles. They predicted lunar eclipses. They built a mathematical framework sophisticated enough that later Greek astronomers borrowed it wholesale. And they did all of this while believing, sincerely and rationally, that the stars were divine. You should sit with that for a moment. They were not wrong about the math. They were not wrong about the patterns. What they were wrong about, if wrong is even the right word, was the nature of what they were looking at. Now, go to ancient Egypt. When the sun set on the Nile and the stars appeared, what the Egyptians saw was not metaphor. The Milky Way was the body of the sky goddess Nut, arching across the heavens. The stars were her bones. Every night she swallowed the sun. Every morning she gave birth to it again. Death and resurrection played out in light every single day for everyone to see. The star Sirius was Isis. When Sirius rose just before dawn after 70 days of absence, what astronomers call its heliacal rising, it signaled the coming flood of the Nile. The star was not announcing the flood. In Egyptian understanding, the star was Isis weeping for her dead husband Osiris, and her tears fell as the Nile's water. Cause and meaning were inseparable. The universe was not mechanical. It was grieving. Every ancient culture that left records tells you the same thing in different words. The stars were people. The stars were ancestors. The stars were the dead. In many cultures across Africa, the Americas, the Pacific, and Australia, a version of this belief emerges independently. The stars are the souls of people who have left the earth. The brightest stars are the most important ancestors. The fading of a star is a soul moving on. The appearance of a new star, a comet, a nova, is a visitation, a warning, a birth. Anthropologist Bara Tolkien documented similar beliefs among indigenous peoples of the American Southwest, where the stars are understood not as distant suns, but as presences, beings with names and relationships to the living, who can be spoken to on the right night in the right way. This is the belief your ancestors held when they looked up. Not a belief they arrived at carelessly. A belief they arrived at because it was the most reasonable explanation available. Because the stars did not look like rocks. They did not look like gas. They moved with what seemed like intention. They appeared at meaningful times. They formed patterns that, if you stared long enough, resolved into shapes that looked alive. And they were there, consistently, night after night, long after every person you had ever known had died. Of course, they were the dead. What else would they be? The Greek philosopher Anaxagoras was one of the first recorded thinkers to suggest otherwise. Around 450 BCE, he proposed that the sun was not a god, but a burning rock, roughly the size of the Peloponnese, he thought, and the stars were similar objects, fiery stones flung through the sky. The Athenians charged him with impiety. He was exiled. His idea was not welcome because it was not just a scientific claim, it was a bereavement. If the stars were rocks, then the dead were not there. If the sun was a stone, then Isis was not weeping. The sky became, in that proposal, very large and very empty. That emptiness was unbearable for most of human history, and it remains, if you are honest with yourself, a little unbearable now. Because something happens when you look up on a clear night, far from city lights, when the Milky Way is actually visible the way your ancestors saw it every single night of their lives. Something pulls in you that you do not quite have language for. A feeling that is not exactly wonder, and not exactly grief, and not exactly recognition, but some combination of all three. Psychologists call it the overview effect when it happens to astronauts, That sudden visceral sense of the earth as small, and the cosmos as vast, and the self as briefly, strangely, meaningfully present. But the feeling existed long before the word for it. Your ancestors felt it every night. They felt it, and they did what humans do when they encounter something too large to hold. They turned it into a story. They put faces on it. They gave it names. They said the light that fades at morning is a god descending. They said the cluster of 7 stars is 7 sisters fleeing across the sky. They said your grandmother is up there now, watching. They said it is not empty. It has never been empty. Modern astronomy has since given you the numbers. The stars are not souls. They are nuclear furnaces burning hydrogen into helium at temperatures your body cannot comprehend. The nearest one, after your sun, is 4 light-years away, a distance so large that the word distance no longer means what it usually means. The Milky Way contains somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars. The observable universe contains something like 2 trillion galaxies. These numbers are true. They are also, in some way that you feel and do not say, less comforting than what your ancestors believed. Tonight, when the sun goes down and the first stars appear, something older than language will stir in you. You will not think of nuclear fusion. You will not think of light years. You will feel, for just a moment, that you are being watched, that something up there knows your name, that the lights have always been on, and someone left them that way for you. That feeling is not ignorance, it is inheritance. It is 200,000 years of your species standing in the dark, tilting its head back, and refusing to believe that the lights meant nothing. Your ancestors were wrong about what the stars are. They were not wrong about why they matter.